Hey there. Ready to dive into something kind of creepy? We're talking the Andromeda Strain today.
Oh, you mean that 1971 sci-fi thriller? Yeah, I get a little jumpy even thinking about it, haha.
Me too. That opening scene with the satellite crashing near that little town
Yeah.
gives me chills every time.
It's such a classic, though. Based on Michael Crichton's book, right?
Yep, and the movie really nails that whole science gone wrong vibe that he was so good at.
It feels so real, doesn't it? Even
Yeah.
though it's about this, alien organism.
Totally. That's what Crichton did best. Blending real science with that creeping sense of dread.
And the movie doesn't hold back, does it? I mean, that lab, the wildfire project, it's both impressive and kind of terrifying.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
All those procedures, the isolation, it's like they're trying to contain a nightmare you can't even see.
Exactly. And speaking of containment, remember those scenes where, well, things don't exactly go to plan?
Oh man, those breaches. My heart was racing every time.
Crichton knew how to build suspense, that's for sure.
And the movie translates it perfectly. Those quick cuts, the close-ups on their faces, you're right there with them.
Absolutely, and the sound design. Don't even get me started on that eerie music.
It's like the soundtrack to a panic attack. But in a good way, of course.
Right. It's effective, that's for sure.
So we've got this deadly organism, a top secret lab, a bunch of scientists racing against the clock. Where do we even start?
Well, I think it's interesting to look at how the movie adapts Crichton's story, There are some key differences.
Oh, totally. Like, for starters, Dr. Livett is a woman in the film, but a man in the book.
Exactly. And that changes the dynamic a bit, don't you think?
For sure. It makes you wonder how audiences back then perceived a female scientist in that role, especially in such a high-stakes situation.
Right. It was a different time, that's for sure. But even with those changes, the core themes still resonate.
Yeah, that fear of the unknown, the consequences of scientific ambition, those are pretty timeless.
Absolutely. And then there's that whole question of how much we can really control nature, even with all our technology.
Especially something we don't understand at all, like this Andromeda Strain. It's like a force of nature, but, from space.
It makes you think twice about exploring the cosmos, doesn't it? What if we bring back something we can't handle?
Don't even joke about that. I still get nightmares about those little microscopic critters taking over the lab.
Uh-huh. Well, that's the power of the Andromeda Strain, right? It gets under your skin and makes you question everything.
Totally. It's both terrifying and thought-provoking at the same time. And let's be honest, those are the best kinds of sci-fi stories.
Couldn't agree more.
So we've got this blend of science, suspense, and some seriously existential questions. But before we get too deep into the weeds, let's take a step back and look at the film itself. What do you say we break down some of the key elements that make the Andromeda Strain so effective?
Sounds like a plan to me. Where should we start?
Well, we've already touched on the suspense, but I think it's worth digging a little deeper into how they create that atmosphere of dread and urgency. I mean, this is a film that keeps you on the edge of your seat from beginning to end.
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of that has to do with the pacing, the way they cut between the action in the lab and what's happening outside, in the real world, so to speak.
You're right. It's like they're constantly reminding you that this isn't just some contained experiment. This is a threat to humanity.
Exactly. And that sense of urgency is heightened by the way they use those split screen shots, remember?
Oh, yeah. Those are so cool. Like, you're literally seeing multiple perspectives at the same time, all feeding into this growing sense of chaos.
Right. It's a brilliant way to show how quickly things can spiral out of control, especially when you're dealing with something as unpredictable as this Andromeda Strain.
And speaking of unpredictable, those scientists, they're in a tough spot, aren't they? I mean, they're the best and the brightest, but even they are struggling to wrap their heads around this thing.
Yeah, and that's what makes them so relatable, I think. They're brilliant, but they're also human. They make mistakes, they disagree, they even get scared.
Totally. Like, remember that scene where Dr. Stone is trying to figure out how to neutralize the organism?
Yeah.
And he's literally just guessing at that point, hoping for a miracle.
It's a great example of how the film shows the limitations of science. We like to think of science as this precise, infallible tool, but the reality is sometimes it's just trial and error, especially when you're dealing with the unknown.
And when the stakes are that high, the pressure must be unbelievable. One wrong move, and, well, it's game over for humanity.
It's a lot of pressure to put on a few people, isn't it? No wonder they're all a little bit on edge.
Yeah, and let's be honest, some of them handle it better than others. I mean, Dr. Hall, he's something else, isn't he?
He's definitely the wild card of the group, that's for sure. But you need someone who's willing to think outside the box, right? Especially in a situation like this.
True, but I'm not sure I'd want to be in the room when he starts questioning everything.
Haha, I hear you there. But those moments of tension, those disagreements, they're all part of what makes the Andromeda Strain so compelling. It's not just about finding a scientific solution, it's about the human drama that unfolds along the way.
Exactly. And that human drama is what really elevates this film beyond your typical sci-fi thriller. You're invested in these characters, you care about what happens to them, and that makes the stakes even higher.
Absolutely. You're not just watching a bunch of scientists in a lab, you're watching a group of people grappling with an unimaginable crisis, and that makes their triumphs and failures all the more powerful.
And those triumphs and failures, they're not always what you expect, are they? I mean, the Andromeda Strain isn't afraid to subvert your expectations, to take you down some unexpected paths.
That's one of the things I love about it. Just when you think you know where the story is going, Crichton throws you a curveball. It keeps you guessing until the very end.
Speaking of the ending, I'm still not entirely sure what to make of it. Like, did they actually stop the Andromeda Strain, or is there a chance it could all happen again?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think it's deliberately left open to interpretation. It's that lingering sense of unease, that knowledge that we can't control everything no matter how much we think we can.
It's a sobering thought, that's for sure, but also maybe a little bit exciting. It reminds us that there's still so much out there we don't know, so much left to discover.
And maybe some things are best left undiscovered.
Yeah, you might be right about that. But hey, if we're going to encounter an alien life form, at least let it be something a little more, well, a little less deadly than the Andromeda Strain.
I second that. But in all seriousness, the Andromeda Strain is a film that stays with you long after the credits roll. It makes you think about our place in the universe, the potential consequences of our actions, and the limits of our own understanding.
It's a film that deserves to be revisited, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Even after all these years, it still has the power to surprise, to terrify, and to make us ask those big, uncomfortable questions about ourselves and the world around us.
I couldn't agree more.
So there you have it. The Andromeda Strain, a film that reminds us that even in the face of the unknown, it's often our own humanity that proves to be both our greatest strength and our most dangerous weakness.
And sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create ourselves.
Ooh, that's a chilling thought. And on that note, I think we need to take a quick break, but don't worry, we'll be right back to dissect even more of the Andromeda Strain. Stay tuned.
And they really nailed that whole visual style, didn't they? I mean, that lab, it's like something out of a dream.
Right, all those sleek surfaces, those crazy suits they have to wear.
Yeah.
It's futuristic, but also kind of sterile, you know?
Totally. It's like they're trying to remove any trace of the outside world, create this completely controlled environment.
Which, of course, makes it even more terrifying when things inevitably go wrong. Because you know it's serious when even those precautions aren't enough.
Exactly. And that's where the real suspense kicks in, doesn't it? That constant tension between control and chaos.
Oh, absolutely. And the way they use those split-screen shots, it's like you're watching a disaster unfold from multiple angles at once.
It's a really effective technique. It adds to that feeling of being overwhelmed, of not being able to process everything that's happening.
Which is probably exactly how those scientists felt. I mean, they're dealing with something they've never encountered before, something completely alien.
And deadly. Don't forget deadly. They're literally risking their lives to try to understand this thing.
True, and they're not always on the same page either, are they? I mean, you've got Dr. Stone, who's all about following the rules, sticking to the protocol.
Right, and then you've got Dr. Hall, who's a bit more of a maverick, willing to bend the rules if it means finding a solution.
Which, let's be honest, sometimes you need that kind of thinking, right? Especially when you're dealing with a crisis of this magnitude.
Absolutely. You need someone who's not afraid to challenge the status quo, to think outside the box.
Even if it means butting heads with the rest of the team. Because those clashes, those moments of conflict, they're all part of the drama, aren't they?
They definitely add to the tension. And let's face it, a little bit of conflict makes for a more interesting story.
It keeps you guessing. Like you're never quite sure who to trust, who's going to make the right call in the end.
And that's what makes the Andromeda Strain so gripping, wouldn't you say? It's not just about the science, it's about the human element.
Totally. It's about how people react under pressure, how they make decisions when the stakes are incredibly high.
And sometimes those decisions have unintended consequences, don't they? I mean, even with the best intentions, things can go wrong, especially when you're dealing with something as unpredictable as this Andromeda Strain.
It's a sobering thought, that's for sure. But it's also a reminder that we're all human, we all make mistakes, And sometimes the best we can hope for is to learn from those mistakes and do better next time.
And hopefully there won't be a next time when it comes to a deadly alien organism.
I'm with you there.
Mm.
But, even though it's a scary thought, there's something about the Andromeda Strain that makes you want to keep watching even when you want to look away.
It's like a car crash, but in a good way. You know it's going to be intense, but you can't help but be drawn to the spectacle of it all.
Exactly. And I think a lot of that has to do with the filmmaking itself. The way they use those close-ups, the sound design, the editing. It's all designed to keep you on the edge of your seat.
Oh, absolutely. And the music, don't even get me started on that eerie, unsettling score. It's perfect for setting the mood.
It's like its own character in the film. It
Yeah.
just seeps into your bones and makes you feel like something's not quite right.
It's brilliant. And it all comes together to create this really effective, really memorable film.
Speaking of memorable, can we talk about those biohazard suits for a second? I mean, they're both ridiculous and kind of cool at the same time.
Oh, totally. They're like something out of a comic book. But, they also serve a purpose. They add to that sense of isolation, of otherworldliness that permeates the entire film.
Like, they're not just scientists anymore. They're astronauts exploring some uncharted territory.
And facing unknown dangers, which of course they do. Remember that scene where, well, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it, but let's just say things get pretty intense in that lab.
Oh, man. That scene, I can still picture it vividly. The flashing lights, the alarms blaring.
Yeah.
It's pure chaos.
And you're right there with those scientists feeling that sense of panic, that desperate need to find a solution before it's too late.
Which is a testament to the power of good filmmaking, isn't it? To be able to transport you to another place, another time, and make you feel like you're right there in the middle of it all.
Absolutely. And the Andromeda Strain does that brilliantly. It's a film that grabs you from the opening scene and doesn't let go until the very end.
And even then, it leaves you with plenty to think about long after the credits have rolled. It's like they're trapped in a nightmare, but they can't wake up,
And they're the only ones who can stop it from becoming everyone's nightmare.
Which brings us to that ending, doesn't it? I mean, talk about leaving you hanging.
Right. That 601 message flashing on the screen. What do you make of it?
Honestly, I'm still not sure. Is it a warning? A sign that the Andromeda Strain is mutating again?
It could be, or maybe it's something else entirely. Crichton was good at that, leaving you with more questions than answers.
Totally. It makes you think, doesn't it? Like, what are the long-term consequences of encountering something like this? Even if we survive the initial outbreak, what happens next?
It's that whole what if factor, right? The unknown unknowns, as they say. And the Andromeda Strain really tacks into that primal fear of the unknown.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that for all our scientific advancements, there's still so much we don't understand about the universe and about ourselves.
And maybe some things are best left that way. Ignorance is bliss, as they say.
Yeah, maybe so. But, even with all the scary stuff, I have to admit, I love a good sci-fi thriller that makes you think. And the Andromeda Strain definitely does that.
Oh, for sure. It's a classic for a reason. It's got everything. Suspense, action, scientific intrigue, even a bit of political commentary thrown in there.
Don't forget those awesome biohazard suits. I kind of want one now, even if they do look a bit much off.
Uh-huh. Right. They're like a character in themselves. But hey, they add to the whole atmosphere, wouldn't you say?
Totally. It's like watching a group of astronauts exploring a hostile alien planet. Except the planet is inside a top-secret lab.
And the aliens are microscopic. Which, let's be honest, is way scarier than some giant bug-eyed monster, right?
Oh, a million times scarier. You can't even see it coming. But seriously, I think what makes the Andromeda Strain so effective, even after all these years, is that it feels plausible. Like it could actually happen.
Especially now, right? With everything going on in the world, it doesn't feel that far-fetched to imagine a deadly virus or some other unknown threat emerging from somewhere unexpected.
It's a scary thought, but it's also a reminder to be prepared, to invest in science and research, and to maybe, just maybe, think twice before poking around in the depths of space.
Couldn't agree more. We've got enough to worry about here on Earth.
Well said. So there you have it, folks. Our deep dive into the Andromeda Strain, a film that's as relevant today as it was back in 1971, is a reminder of the power and the potential peril of scientific curiosity and the importance of facing the unknown, even when it terrifies us. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and maybe keep a biohazard suit handy, just in case.